All right, let's dive right into this explainer of Fyodor Dostoevsky's classic 1848 short novel, White Nights. We're going to be exploring the deep psychology of loneliness, the incredibly intoxicating power of the imagination, and the sudden, overwhelming impact of genuine human connection. If you've ever felt totally isolated in a crowded city, or honestly, if you've ever found yourself living more inside your own head than in the actual physical world, Dostoevsky literally wrote this for you. And we're pulling this directly from the InfoBooks digital library, which is great because it gives us unfiltered access to Dostoevsky's poetic and deeply emotional prose. It's a text that perfectly bridges the gap between wide-eyed romanticism and heavy, gritty psychological realism. So, to really frame our journey through the 4 nights of this story, we gotta ask ourselves one big, fundamental question. What actually happens when a guy who has lived his entire life inside his own imagination suddenly collides head-on with the real world? It's this ultimate clash between the safety of our dreams and the terrifying vulnerability of actual, messy life. Okay, so let's set the scene, starting with the title itself, The White Nights of St. Petersburg. This is actually a real meteorological phenomenon. During this specific time of year, the sun barely even dips below the horizon, so you get this persistent, kind of eerie twilight where true darkness never actually arrives. And this perpetual state of in-between, it perfectly mirrors the mind of our narrator, existing somewhere right on the edge of day and night, reality and fantasy. And it's right here, in this twilight city, that we meet our unnamed narrator. Dostoevsky explicitly defines him as an archetype, the dreamer. He actually describes himself not really as a person, but as a creature of an intermediate sort. He's lived utterly alone for 8 whole years in this dingy green room with a spider web on the ceiling. He doesn't really know people. He knows the buildings of St. Petersburg, literally imagining that the houses are speaking to him. He wanders around a city that's quickly emptying out for the summer, profoundly and acutely aware of his own isolation.
So that brings us to night 1, the chance encounter.
And bam! A single moment completely shatters his isolated little world. He's out wandering late at night, and he spots a young woman crying by a canal railing. When some staggering, overly aggressive guy starts harassing her, our dreamer instinctively steps in with a knotted stick to rescue her. She takes his arm, and he just frantically confesses his complete lack of real-world experience. He blurts out, "If my arm trembles, it is because it has never been held by a pretty little hand like yours. I am a complete stranger to women." I mean, wow. It is a stunningly vulnerable and raw confession to make to a total stranger on the street. Now, the young woman, whose name is Nastenka, is actually pretty charmed by how timid and honest he is. So they establish this crucial dynamic right off the bat. Nastenka is desperate for advice and a friend, and she agrees to meet him the next night. But, and this is a massive but, she lays down one strict, absolute rule. He cannot, under any circumstances, fall in love with her. She needs a friend, but romantic love is completely off the table. And our dreamer, who is basically starved for any human contact, eagerly swears to the pact. Moving right along to night 2, trading histories. So they meet up, sit on a bench, and just feverishly start trading their life stories. Dostoevsky does this brilliant juxtaposition here. You've got the dreamer, who claims he's absolutely without any history. His isolation is expansive, invisible, and entirely in his head. But Nastenka, her isolation is incredibly claustrophobic and fiercely physical. Get this. She has literally been pinned to her blind grandmother's dress for 2 whole years as a punishment for a childhood prank. One is a prisoner of his own mind, right? And the other is quite literally a prisoner in her own home. When Nastenka pushes him on how someone can just not have a history, the dreamer totally snaps into this passionate, almost breathless rant. He yells, "I am a type. A type is an original. It's an absurd person." He suddenly realizes just how tragic and absurd his lifestyle is, and he feels this overwhelming need to confess the elaborate lies he tells himself just to survive the crushing loneliness. He just rapid fires these wild, epic, historical fantasies that he uses to fill up his boring, empty life. We're talking hanging out with the author Hoffman, surviving the St. Bartholomew's Night massacre, fighting in the Battle of Berezina, arguing with Danton, romancing Cleopatra. He literally creates entire magical universes inside his solitary room. But he admits to Nastenka that when the dream ends, his soul is just left empty and sad because he knows it's all an illusion.
But Nastenka's history, it's devastatingly real. Her monotonous life, literally pinned to her grandmother's dress, gets completely flipped upside down when a young guy, a lodger, moves into the upstairs of their tiny house. This lodger basically becomes her only window to the outside world.
And here's the timeline of exactly how that plays out. He arrives, he takes an interest in her. He starts secretly passing her books by Walter Scott and Pushkin, totally expanding her mind. He even manages to take Nastenka and her blind grandmother out to the opera to see The Barber of Seville. Nastenka falls deeply, deeply in love. But then he drops a bomb. He has to leave for Moscow for a year to get his finances in order. Before he goes, though, they make a promise. He will return in exactly 1 year, and if she still loves him, they'll be together.
Now, here is the agonizing hook. That year, it's up. The lodger has been back in St. Petersburg for exactly 3 days. 3 entire days, and he hasn't reached out. Not a single word. No letter, nothing. Nastenka is waiting out there on the embankment because that was their agreed-upon spot, but she is absolutely terrified that he's forgotten her.
Which drops us right into night 3, the wait. All that frantic, nervous energy from before is suddenly replaced by this crushing tension. The weather, which was so magical and twilighty, completely flips to just gloomy, miserable rain. It perfectly mirrors Nastenka's rising panic as another day ticks by with a 0 word from her lover. And it also reflects the dreamer's sinking depression. He's actually gone and delivered a letter from Nastenka to the lodger's friends, acting as the ultimate selfless middleman. But the absolute agony of realizing he's just a spectator to her love for someone else is totally tearing him apart inside.
As they wait, Nastenka is leaning so heavily on the dreamer's unwavering kindness that she actually blurts out this incredibly heart-wrenching line, "Why isn't he you? Why isn't he like you? He is not as good as you, though I love him more than you." Ouch, right? I mean, talk about tragic irony. He is giving her absolutely everything he has, but she is emotionally tethered to a ghost.
And that brings us to the climax. Night 4, the confession. Everything finally boils over. The dreamer gets to the embankment and Nastenka is already there, practically clutching the railing. She looks at him with this desperate, fragile hope, but he brings the worst news imaginable. There is no letter. The lodger didn't come. Nastenka's final shred of hope is shattered. She just completely breaks down, sobbing uncontrollably, utterly convinced she's been cruelly abandoned and played for a fool. Seeing her in that much absolute torment pushes the dreamer completely over the edge. He just can't keep it inside anymore. He shatters that promise from night 1. In this completely frantic, raw, emotional moment, he cries out, "It's impossible, but I love you, Nastenka." He knows he shouldn't say it. He knows it's the absolute worst timing, but his heart is just so full of genuine love that the words literally explode out of him. But you know what's really striking here? It's how he confesses. He begs her not to push him away, and he makes this incredibly selfless offer. He vows to love her without his love ever becoming a burden to her. He says even if she still loves the lodger, she would only ever feel a grateful, warm heart beating at her side, ready to support her. It is quite literally the purest, most egoless form of romantic devotion you can imagine. And literally just as he finishes pouring his entire soul out to her, offering a future built on total devotion, Nastenka stops crying, she looks right at him, dries her tears, and actually starts to say that maybe, just maybe, since her ex has completely ghosted her, she could learn to love the dreamer. But, and this is where Dostoevsky is an absolute genius, the text cuts off right as she's formulating her answer. It leaves us with this brilliant, incredibly provocative final thought for you to chew on. Faced with the ultimate choice between a pure, deeply selfless love sitting right in front of her and the powerful, intoxicating ghost of her past, who will she choose? More importantly, what would you choose?